There's a video out there criticizing Rand's notion of happiness, which is done by the YouTuber named Sirius. To give credit where it's due, the video does better than most critiques of Rand. One positive point is that the video actually points to statements made by Rand, rather than making claims about what she said with no direct source. So, thank you for that. However, his critique has some flaws in it. Most of it comes by way of misunderstanding how Rand integrated certain ideas together. His critique comes in relation to how can certain people be seen as immoral under this notion of happiness. Certain people like thieves, dictators, and oppressors. They think Rand gives two answers in relation to this question, both of which they critique. I'll be dealing with those first, then come back to the main point. You'll see why. But to let Sirius speak for themselves.
Think about all the people in the world who seem happy despite them being morally depraved, not just by your standard, but also by the standards that Rand sets up. If Rand is right, that the pursuit of one's happiness is the highest moral purpose, then how can she fault dictators, oppressors, thieves, and murderers who have prospered and, by all accounts, lived happy lives? Rand does have an answer to this, but it is this answer which makes her concept of happiness broken at a fundamental level. To justify herself, she quotes from John Galt, who, it must be said, is a fictional character in a book that she wrote. Quote, "Happiness is a state of non-contradictory joy, a joy without penalty or guilt, a joy that does not clash with any of your values and does not work for your own destruction. Happiness is possible only to a rational man, the man who desires nothing but rational goals, seeks nothing but rational values, and finds his joy in nothing but rational actions." Unquote. In other words, Rand sidesteps the problem entirely by simply redefining happiness as something else. What raiders, thieves, and exploiters feel is not real happiness. No true state of happiness can be achieved through the values that are improper to man. No true state of happiness puts sugar on his porridge. Rand's attempt to salvage this is lengthy and hard to parse. Boiled down, there are two real responses that Rand gives, both of which commit her to an even greater sin than a no true Scotsman. One response she gives is that, quote, "happiness can properly be the purpose of ethics, but not the standard," unquote, which she uses to distinguish herself from hedonism. She does say a lot of stuff after this, but this explication fails to get off the ground because it's straightforwardly contradictory to the foundational presuppositions that Rand makes. Recall earlier one of her central claims, quote, "without an ultimate goal or end, there can be no lesser goals or means," unquote. Under her own definition of terms, it makes no sense to say that something can be the purpose of ethics, i.e. the goal of ethics, but not the standard of ethics, as she already defined the ultimate goal as being the standard against which all other values are judged. This response, then, is a non-starter.
So Sirius has believed they have found a contradiction within Rand. On the one hand, Rand believes that there's a difference between the purpose of ethics and the standard of ethics. But on the other hand, she states that the ultimate goal serves as the standard for evaluating lesser goals. Why do they believe there's a conflict here? Because if happiness is the purpose of ethics, then it is the goal you are trying to achieve with ethics, making it the ultimate goal of ethics. And since the ultimate goal is the standard we use to evaluate lesser goals, then happiness is the standard of ethics. So on what basis could you make a distinction between the purpose of ethics and the standard of ethics when the purpose serves as the standard of ethics? On the one hand, Rand states that there's a difference between the goal we are trying to achieve with ethics and the standard of ethics. But on the other hand, she states that the goal serves as the standard. However, this is all a misunderstanding. Happiness may be the reason why you're ethical, but happiness doesn't make something ethical. Why does she believe this? For Rand, happiness is an effect, a byproduct of achieving that which you value. Or put more simply, you feel happiness when you achieve that which you find worthy of achievement. You know, that feeling you got as a kid when you finally beat that one hard level in that video game? Or the feeling you get as an adult when you finally get that promotion you've been working towards for a very long time? This is why Rand makes a distinction between the purpose of ethics and the standard of ethics. It is simply not enough to place happiness as the standard of ethics. For all that you would be saying is, go achieve that which you already find worthy of achievement. A simple reaffirmation of the status quo, of values that you already hold. No, the standard of ethics for Rand is one's life, which means that which is good benefits your life, and that which is bad destroys your life. Having happiness as the standard of ethics doesn't tell you what is for or against your life, for you can be finding value in things that are self-destructive to your life. Once you understand this, you can then understand Rand's statement in relation to there being an ultimate goal and there being a separation between the purpose and the standard of ethics. You see that happiness is limited in its ability to serve as the standard of ethics. But yet, it is still important. It is what makes life worth living. But it doesn't tell you how to properly live. Hence, you can make a distinction between what is the ultimate goal psychologically and what is the ultimate goal existentially. That is, happiness may be what you ultimately want to achieve psychologically, but in order to live, one must treat life as the standard existentially.
The other response she has available is to essentially double down on there being a significant difference between joy that's, quote, free of contradiction and joy that isn't. She does give it her best effort to try and explain what the problem is. Quote, the maintenance of life and the pursuit of happiness are not two separate issues. To hold one's own life as one's ultimate value and one's own happiness as one's highest purpose are two aspects of the same achievement. Existentially, the activity of pursuing rational goals is the activity of maintaining one's life. Psychologically, its result, reward, and concomitant is an emotional state of happiness. It is by experiencing happiness that one lives one's life. And when one experiences the kind of pure happiness that is an end in itself, the kind that makes one think, this is worth living for, what one is greeting and affirming in emotional terms is the metaphysical fact that life is an end in itself, unquote. In her estimation, then, there is an inherent problem in happiness insofar as it contradicts, quote, rational goals, unquote. Indeed, they cannot be separated. As a general point, the idea that sticking to one's values will lead to greater happiness than short-term compromises is nothing new. However, with Rand specifically, there is a huge problem. If happiness is, quote, non-contradictory joy, unquote, then the obvious question is, contradictory to what? Of course, the answer to this question for Rand is the, quote, rational ethic, unquote. But consider exactly how it is that the rational ethic is justified by Rand. Yes, she justifies her ethic as rational because it leads to the pursuit of happiness as an end in itself. In fact, as the, quote, highest moral purpose, unquote. The joy you might feel from pursuing other values is not truly happiness, because it can only be true happiness if it comes from the right values, and we know that those are the right values because they promote your true happiness. If you can't see it already, this is circular. Because Rand has no developed concept of happiness, she is forced to appeal to the values a sense of happiness comes from to make it distinct from other kinds of happiness. However, it was the pursuit of happiness upon which those values were justified in the first place. In true capitalist fashion, Ayn Rand has attempted to make an argument that pulls itself up by its own bootstraps. In doing so, however, just like in the real world, the actual result is its nose on the concrete.
So Sears has a second objection, which is in relation to Rand's definition of happiness, which is a state of non-contradictory joy. He finds this definition to be sort of a rationalization. Why does he believe this? Well, as he perfectly asks, non-contradiction to what? What he finds the answer to be is non-contradiction to rational values. And what makes a value rational is that it leads to happiness. So, under their interpretation, what's being said looks like happiness is a state of non-contradiction between rational values, and we know what's a rational value because it leads to happiness. So pretty much, happiness is that which doesn't contradict happiness. So this is another misunderstanding. When Rand states that happiness is a state of non-contradictory joy, she means non-contradiction between your values. For if you have a contradiction between your values, then you cannot fully invest yourself in either one of them. To invest in one, you'd be going against the other. To really illustrate this point, think of a priest who doesn't believe in God, but yet is still expected to preach the gospel by the community. He wants to make his community happy, but yet cannot be honest with himself or the community. There's this internal conflict going on within him, and one cannot be fully happy while having this conflict. If you notice, this is a very important link between your epistemology and your values. To logically structure your values in a consistent way is a necessity in order to achieve true happiness. This is why it's important to have rational values. And what makes a value rational is that it is in accordance with reason, not simply that it makes you happy. Remember what I said earlier. Happiness is a consequence, an effect, a byproduct of achieving that which you find worthy of achievement. Having rational values is the only way to experience true happiness. Hence, there is no conflict between that which is rational and that which makes you happy. That there is no conflict between your reason and your emotions. So how does this all go back to the main point? Well, once you understand that happiness is a consequence of your values, and that in order to have true happiness, you must have consistent values, and in order to live, you must have values that contribute to your life, which is what morality guides you toward. You can then evaluate people such as thieves, dictators, and oppressors as being self-destructive. So how exactly are such people self-destructive? You want to think comparatively. Don't think in terms of thieves, dictators, and oppressors all pursuing their happiness alone. You want to compare such things to their opposite. Someone who would steal from you versus someone who would create something of value to trade with. A dictatorship versus a free country. Someone who is oppressing you versus someone who would respect your independence. Once you start to make such comparisons, you begin to notice that each options are not equal in their outcome. That one option seems to provide more value than the other. When you steal something, not only do you have to deceive people and be dishonest in order to not get caught, which makes you dependent upon other people's perception of you, but you also deprive yourself of this sense of achievement. When setting out to create something of value, you get a sense of your own capabilities on how well you can deal with life, with survival, with living. And when you're successful with creating something of value, you get this deep sense of achievement that you are capable of dealing with life. And it is this deep feeling you can't get from actions like stealing. And the reason that is because you know you haven't earned what you have stolen. From the standpoint of happiness, actions like stealing are self-destructive to your self-esteem. Not only does stealing deprive you of a good feeling, but it maintains a horrible one. When people ask questions like, what if I steal something and nobody finds out about it? They are effectively calling themselves nobody. And that's not purely an issue of grammar. That is, by nobody, I mean nobody else but me. It's an illustration of the fact that they don't take their own consciousness seriously, that they don't take themselves seriously, that you get a feeling of shame when other people judge you for stealing, but yet you feel nothing when you judge yourself for the same action. But of course, that's just stealing. What of dictatorships and oppression? I think this is one of the more obvious contradictions when it comes to the destruction of oneself. Such dictatorships and oppressors seek to rule over people in society, but yet at the same time set up societal conditions where people have less to offer you. People do not flourish under dictatorships and oppression. So, the less that a person flourishes in life, the less they have to offer you. You can see here then that people are far more beneficial to you when they're free, when you respect their rights, when you respect their independence. since it gives people a far more better environment to flourish within. And I'm not purely speaking in economic terms, but also psychologically. To deny people's freedom is to deny their authenticity, since when people are not allowed to act freely, then they are not free to act honestly. To engage with people on such oppressive grounds is an act of self-blinding, for you'll never be aware of the values that people actually hold. It'd be like marrying someone who you couldn't tell if they actually love you or just pretending to. Such an oppressive relationship isn't even something you'd want in your own personal life, more or less something you'd want ruling over a country. But I think I've said enough for today. Thanks for watching the video, and remember, Ayn Rand was not a libertarian.